Hey there. Welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor, a podcast where I want to think more deeply with you about Christian faith and life. Hey, all you believers, you non-believers, unaffiliated believers, sort of believers, and even you think I'm a believers. Welcome. My name is Ed Rybarczyk, not Ed Rybarczyk, but Ed Rybarczyk. Rybar means fish in Polish, and Czech means man. So somewhere way back in the family lineage, we were fishermen. And yes, I do have a PhD, but now, after 10 years of adjunct teaching, followed by 15 years of full-time teaching, I don't have a teaching job. Now, don't worry, there was no big scandal, and I wasn't asked to leave, though undoubtedly some people were happy to see me go. I just decided it was time for a life change. It was time to roll the dice and see if God might do something new with me or through me. And so here I am, a novice in the world of podcasting. I'm a podcaster youngster. I'm a newbie to the world of electronic media. This episode today is going to explain why am I doing this podcast. Do you ever have hard questions about the Christian faith? Do you ever have lingering doubts that you're afraid to process out loud? Do you ever want to ask questions but are concerned that other believers will think that you yourself aren't committed? If your answer to any of those questions is yes, then this show is for you. I won't pretend to know everything about Christianity or life for goodness sake, but I do enjoy digging and studying and finding answers to questions about both the Christian faith and what it means to be a Christian in this life, and how do we go about serving the Lord at this time in history. Now, very briefly about myself, in high school, I was a jock. I loved baseball and basketball, and I did all right in my studies. But I took as many easy-peasy classes as I could, and I guess it's only ironic then that the only F I ever earned in any class ever was in wood shop. And I actually liked wood shop. It's just that I skipped it too many times. It was an afternoon class. But soon after high school, I began to want to learn more, especially about truth. Now, maybe I'm weird, but I'm a truth nut. Maybe it was my own chaotic childhood that created a vacuum or a hole or a hunger, but I want the truth. For me, no truth equals no meaning. There are folks today who protest and march and riot shouting, "No justice, no peace." And I understand that lament. I understand that kind of logic. But for me, I want truth. I've always been interested in truth. So my mantra, my saying would be no truth equals no meaning. Life is too short to base my own identity upon lies or fairy tales or philosophic constructions or now, apropos in 2017, philosophic deconstructions. One of the weird things that I learned across my 25 years of teaching college is that we're not all wired similarly. That should have been evident to everybody. I kind of went in thinking that everybody was along the same lines and they all wanted to learn the same way. But the truth is that evangelicals and charismatic Christians tend to be wired along more emotional lines. Non-denominational types especially tend to be wired along emotional lines. But some of us are also thinkers. We want to think and learn and grow. Our churches, may God richly bless them, are oriented for emotional types. They give us space to come in and emote in the presence of the Lord. But some of us aren't always excited to go and emote in a crowd of other believers, and again, maybe you're like that. A few years ago in a graduate class that I taught, there was a student named Andrew. 3 times during that semester, Andrew came up and told me that he had grown up in an evangelical milieu, but he always felt uncomfortable and even guilty because he found himself wanting to follow Jesus, but wasn't himself connecting at an emotional level. He would go to church and feel bad that he wasn't feeling Jesus course through his heart like all the other folks around him seemed to be feeling. And it turns out, he realized, that he was more of a thinker. He finally found a church that could help him process along that line. Now, I appreciate Andrew both for his honesty and his willingness to express his disconcert with the expression of Christianity within which he was raised. And please know, I'm not at all recounting that story to try to wreck evangelicalism, but if, like Andrew, you want to work through doubt and issues and think more carefully about the faith, welcome to my show. In important ways, I myself am a theologian because of my doubts. But rather than dismiss those doubts, I, with the help of some amazing professor mentors over the years, I worked through those doubts and found careful answers. And I have to tell you up front, for my part, I am allergic to Christian formulas. I'm allergic to bumper sticker kinds of mantras and thinkings. My faith is not in faith, but my faith is not also in human intellect. So faith and reason need some unpacking. This requires some processing for us, some reflection. And for today, I've come up 3 ways to think through why the issue of thinking carefully about our faith matters. Why does that even matter? And number 1, and you know this, we live in a culture of disbelief. It's so cool and trendy. It's so with it. It's so woke to be cynical and skeptical. Even this week, I saw an interview of a movie star on a TV show, and he was so skeptical and so cynical, and the interviewer was taking him as being so deep, right? He's so deep because he doubts everything. He doubts everything except his own doubt. Of his own doubt, he's dogmatically certain. We hear about healthy skepticism in our day, and all the time I hear people talk about blind faith, but as one of my favorite scholars, Leslie Newbigin, put it, we never hear about blind skepticism or healthy faith, and that's because today's tide is against religious faith. It's like we are swimming in a sea of disbelief. And that ocean water that passes through our gills day in and day out, tide in and tide out, is the water of disbelief and cynicism. We're surrounded with it. We're immersed in it. Secondly, why does thinking carefully about the faith matter? Number 2, universities and colleges promote cynicism about everything. If you attended higher education, and I'm sorry to say it this way, if you attended higher education, whether Christian or not, you are more likely to be a disbeliever than if you hadn't gone. And that's because the presupposition of most every class is that there's no metaphysical reality, no ultimate reality. Students have told me for years transferring from public schools that this is the case, and I've had students over my 25 years come to me as Christians and tell me about it, how the other classes are attempting to deconstruct the faith, because the assumption is there's nothing really real. There's nothing really true. The principle behind a lot of this is that physicality is all there is. Or even more cynically, the presupposition is that reality is only what it has been constructed to be by whichever power broker or imperialist power group that happens to be ruling at the time. And I think this is an insidious worldview that we find ourselves navigating today, but that just makes following Jesus Christ more exciting, I think, more dangerous. And I don't know about you, but I am not interested in living a tame life or a boring life. Third, why does thinking carefully about our faith matter? My third answer is that a study of history will make clear that Christian faith, for nearly all of 2,000 years, has not been afraid of thinking. Christian faith knows that God gave human beings a brain, an intellect. Really, some of the most brilliant people that have ever walked the planet, including scientists, were Christians. And in this show, I hope that you'll turn on your brain, be willing to think deeper than a slogan or a formula or a bumper sticker. Again, I love my faith more for having thought deeply about it. I've said for years in class, and I find it odd that people, millions of Christians, are banking their eternal destination on Christianity, but they have no interest in thinking carefully about it or studying it or considering its foundations, right? You can hear the conversations. I've heard them. You believe Jesus is the means to eternal life, right? Yes. So you obviously want to understand who he was in his context, right? No. But you clearly want to know what Jesus Christ means for how we navigate life today, right? Nope. But you want to follow Jesus, right? Yes. So you must want to dig deeper into your faith, right? Nope. God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. Settles what? It. Everything. Because Jesus is the answer for the world today. Well, right, I agree that he's the answer for the world yesterday, today, and forever, but what's the question? Well, there is no question, not for me. You don't ever have questions about our faith? Nope. Not ones that I want to bother with, not ones that I want to take the time to explore and wrestle with. I just want to love on Jesus and love on other people and go to heaven. Now for me, wow, I don't get that kind of faith. In some ways, I kind of admire it, but I'm just not wired like that. And if you're listening, I'll bet you're not wired like that either. Me, I'm not wired for ignorance. I'm not wired for blind faith, and I hope you aren't either. Now, I want to tell you up front again in this first episode the kinds of things that I hope to talk about in this podcast. First, I want to think with you about faith and reason. Is it reasonable to be a Christian? Is faith contrary to reason? Are we supposed to have faith in faith, or is reason objective while faith is silly and subjective? There are all kinds of stereotypes and quote-unquote givens in society that juxtapose or pit faith and reason against one another. I do want to talk some about ethics. Secondly, ethics, because there's so much divide, there's so much tension in society about ethical issues, and I want to show the reasoning behind different positions on ethics. I want to try to seek out a resolution and suggest where the Bible has perspective on these ethical issues, and even try to show why differing Christians sometimes take different positions on moral dilemmas. So faith and reason and ethics. I do want to do some apologetics. Third, are there good reasons to believe? Should we try to argue people into the faith? Or are apologetics something that's an in-house matter? Fourth, I want to talk about science with you. Do Christians have to be afraid of science? Is evolution true? What can we learn from science? Again, I believe there's just a bunch of false dichotomizing in the media about Christianity and science, as though Christians live under a musty boulder somewhere, hoping to not have to deal with science. It's a tired canard, a tired lie. Christianity, the truth is, if you study it, Christianity, through weaving together some Aristotelian philosophy with a biblical worldview, gave rise to science as we know it today. And we need to think more carefully as believers about science and not accept these phony constructions. Fifth, I hope to, in the course of future podcasts, talk with you about different Christian spiritualities, right? I got this question all the time as a professor. How is it that Christians who worship the same God do life so differently? How is it that Christians who are trying to follow Jesus have different spiritual lives, different daily lives? How do they worship so differently? And there are good reasons for the Christian spiritualities, and I think it would be helpful, edifying, for Christians to understand some of those differences and how the different groups got to where they are. 6, I am really interested in beauty and aesthetics. I wrote a book on theology and aesthetics, and I believe that evangelicals, again, particularly, don't think enough about the role of aesthetics in life. How can we use music and art? How can we use architecture for the glory and the wonder and the mission of Jesus Christ? We have society turning toward image more than ever, and the church is still mostly exclusively doing word. We're mostly doing mood lighting and in our churches when we could be using image to help shape people and disciple people. I've had students ask me, hey, Ed, in your podcast, could you do things on Christian traditions like fasting, church attendance? What is prayer about? What's a liturgical calendar? Why do people use a liturgical calendar? And I hope that you will send me in your own questions and comments, and I'll give you an email site for that later. And then I'm hoping also in the course of these podcasts to be doing movie reviews and jokes. Now, back to movies, I grew up in a church that said watching movies was immoral. And even worse, I was taught that if you went to a movie theater, you might miss the rapture if you were caught at the wrong time in a movie theater. And so I would go and sit there trying to enjoy the movie, terrified that the rapture was going to occur at any minute. But I want Christians, if you're going to engage popular culture, to go enjoy popular culture, but to do it with your brain turned on. Go be critically minded about what's going on. So I will give frequent reviews of newly released movies. And then, like I said, I also want to do in these podcasts an occasional joke. And I'll tell you, I just love to laugh. In our embattled era, people don't laugh enough. In our overly politicized society, where people take themselves and their positions so seriously, we don't laugh enough. And especially we don't laugh enough at ourselves. For me, people who can't laugh at themselves are not likely candidates for deep friendship with me. Get over yourself. There's more to life than constantly looking to be wounded. And I think laughter is great medicine, and especially if we can laugh at ourselves, laugh at one another, that is a really beautiful, wonderful thing that we can share together. In fact, I got a joke for you right now. Sister Grace at the convent opened a letter from home and found a $100 bill from her parents. She smiled at the gesture. Standing next to a second-floor window while she read the letter, she looked down and noticed a shabbily dressed stranger leaning against the lamppost below. Quickly she wrote, "Don't despair, Sister Grace." She put that on a piece of paper, wrapped the $100 bill in it, and tossed it out the window. The stranger picked it up, read the note, tipped his hat to Sister Grace, and hurried away. Well, the next day, Sister Grace was told that a man was asking to see her. She went down and found the stranger waiting. Without a word, he handed her a huge wad of $100 bills. "What's this?" she asked. "That's your $8,000, sister," he replied. "My horse, Don't Despair, paid 80 to 1 at the racetrack." Now, I'm not encouraging you to go play the ponies. Thank you for listening today. If you have questions or comments you would like to send to me, Send them to uncensoredunprofessor@gmail.com. Again, that's uncensoredunprofessor@gmail.com. Send me your clean jokes. Send me follow-up questions. Turn your brains on, everybody.